So the one issue that we had was related to how to really get sales once you get your GSA schedule. And I love this request because I know that this is a big issue for a lot of contractors. And I've seen the statistic out there that something like 52% of the businesses that get on GSA federal supply schedules lose their contract within the first couple of years for the lack of meeting the minimum required sales activity. And that really is terrible because you do all this work to get in, which is not only time intensive, but there's also a cost element often that goes into all of this. Of course, time is money. And so we wanted to talk about this today. And Michael suggested that we reach out to Rich because Rich has some experience in this area. So Rich, I'd love if you could just maybe start out by introducing yourself to our community here and tell us a little bit about what you do in your company, and then also specifically what has been your experience with GSA, helping contractors get some business on GSA, doing it yourself. And we'll start there.
Thank you. Looking through the list, and I recognized one name. Shout outs to Cicely there. I know we've talked before. We met at the 8A conference. If I've met any of you else before and I don't recognize your name, apologies right now. Please reach out after and say hello. Always good to see people again. Yes, so I've been working as a government contracting sales coach, sales consultant now for about 8 years. I started in the government contracting area about 20 years ago and worked specifically with a prime contractor and was successful in winning multiple government contracts with the Department of Veterans Affairs. So fast forward a couple years ago, I just noticed there was a big gap in the market that needed filling. There was plenty of people out there that would profess to help people get their GSA schedule, but there really wasn't very much in the area of helping people win contracts on their GSA schedule. A lot of folks even in the area that helped people get their contracts. Some people would be very hands-on and help people get their GSA schedule contract. Others would just basically give them a list of to-dos and what they needed to get done. I tried to fill both those areas in, so I helped a dozen or so get their GSA schedule, but work very closely with the clients to do that. Help them do some of the heavy lifting that they're not used to because they don't have the experience in government contracting. Maybe they don't know how to do their price research. Maybe they don't know how to write a technical proposal. Maybe they don't know how to strategically decide which SINs they need to be on. Those are all things that I help my clients with. But then the other thing I do before I even agree to help them, they usually say, I need a GSA schedule. My question is why? Why do you need a GSA schedule? Oh, because that's how you get government contracts. Maybe if there are people buying what you sell using the GSA schedule right now. So that's the study that we go through first. Is it worth getting a GSA schedule? It might be worth it to get another contract vehicle like NASA SOUP or Oasis or Alliant. We don't know until we actually dig in the data. People have worked with the SAM data bank. It's a little different than USA Spending. I have not been able to find this data on USA Spending, but if you use the SAM data bank, there is a field that tells us, or maybe not on SAM, but it was used open market. There's no scheduled contract or no contract vehicle was used. But then if a contract vehicle has been used, there's a little number in there, anywhere between 9 and 16 digits. And those first 6 digits tell us, how was this bought? What contract was this bought on? And so we go through that study and see, okay, well, this makes sense. Let's go after a GSA schedule. But it also tells us who buys what we sell using the GSA schedule so we can put a marketing strategy together to help them sell once they get their GSA schedule. By the way, it's also very compelling when you turn something into a GSA schedule contracting officer to show them we already have a marketing plan, as opposed to, I don't know, well, isn't this the Amazon of government sales? All we have to do is put our schedule in and they're just going to submit orders. So helping them with that understanding is where I help, is the gap that I think I've filled in the last few years.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for that introduction. So I'm glad you mentioned the fact of, do you really need a schedule? Because I think that's unfortunately why we see a lot of people get into the schedules and they probably shouldn't have got one in the first place. And so I'm guessing that because of the topic today that we announced, that most people may already have a schedule. And so they're looking to how to basically make use of that. I guess on one downside is like if you did some market research with a person and you saw that like, well, this is not really the place that you need to be. What would be your advice to somebody that's kind of like they've gone through the process, they've got on the schedule, you did the market research with them after the fact, and if this is not the right place for them, what would be your advice to them? Do they just abandon efforts there, let it expire, shift their focus into the different pathway? Do they try to salvage something out of a bad situation?
I have one client that I'm thinking of in it specifically, and what they do is a real niche. I mean, the platform that they work on is very nichey. It's not very well known. The people that do know it, but I would say in the last year, there's only been 10 buys on GSA for their product in the last year. So what I encourage them to do is start reaching out to the open market bids. There was a good number of open market bids last year using the platform that they supply, and reaching out to them early and saying, look, we have a GSA schedule. Notice that your agency uses the GSA schedule for other things. Why not use it for this? And we also piggyback that with, because they sell a certain platform software. This isn't the one, but I'm going to use Salesforce because everybody uses it. They sell the licenses for Salesforce and they sell custom solutions on the Salesforce. So they've used that selling the licenses as an entree to selling their services. And no, there isn't anybody else that's doing it, but giving their customers that flexibility has turned out to be very positive for them. And they're getting inquiries from multiple agencies on their services now, which is more lucrative than their software licenses to begin with. That's one way I would put it. Just start responding to RFIs for the services or products that you sell and say, we're on GSA. Try to influence that acquisition to go towards GSA. If they already use another contract vehicle, you can give it a shot, but likely you're going to stick with that other contract vehicle, whether it's NASA SOUP or CIO SP4 or.
That's great advice. I really love that. So essentially, to sum up what you just said, is that if they're seeing things coming out in the open market, which typically those are, if they're over 25K, that's when you'll see those items hit SAM. If you're seeing those items hit SAM and you have a GSA schedule for those, I think a little education of the contracting officer would be helpful so that they could put it back through GSA, because technically speaking, they should be going to GSA if there's contractors on schedule before they go out to open market, barring kind of any extenuating circumstances.
You have to continue to sell the schedule. Another example, contracting officer asked a client for market research. We gave him the market research. I think we even put our schedule number in there, but for whatever reason, it was ignored. So we followed up with that contracting officer, said, where is this in the area of being put out to bid? Well, I'm still doing my work. I have to get this done. I have to get that done. I said, have you thought about using a GSA schedule? Oh, I didn't know you had a GSA schedule. Well, we had it. It was in there, but okay. All right. Yeah, we do have a GSA schedule.
Yeah.
Well, but you don't have any competitors on GSA. Well, no, we don't have competitors act the same brand name, but there's equals out there. You have to be willing to expose your competition a little bit. If you know that you can stand up against your competition, it's very powerful, because you could say, well, there's 2 or 3 other people that do it on GSA, and do the market research for them, lead them to the water. And that strategy has been helpful too, to sell the GSA schedule, because I'm going to tell you, I'd much rather have a GSA schedule bid where you have 2 or 3 people bidding on it, because there just isn't as much competition. And usually the people with the GSA schedule are a little more savvy. They're not going to accept a 1% margin just to win a contract. Where in the open market, it's the Wild West. You don't know who you're going up against. You have that person that just wants to win that first contract, and they will do anything to do it, including marking it up 0.5%. That's why we steer them to our GSA schedule. It's rarely lucrative for us not to.
Right. Absolutely. No, those are great tips, man. I 100% agree with everything you just said. And one thing I'll piggyback on with regards to the competition under the FAR for GSA, one of the suggestions I was going to make for those who've gotten their schedule, if they haven't already done this, is just to read FAR Part 8 in its entirety. You can Google FAR Part 8, it'll bring right up acquisition.gov, but that sets forth the procedures that all contracting officers are supposed to follow, or they shall follow, which is set by law in terms of ordering from GSA. And it'll specifically state in there. And what is kind of eye-opening here is that they can go up to the simplified acquisition threshold, which is $250,000, and just basically survey 3 contractors out of however many's on the schedule. They can say, hey, we're going to compete this to everybody, but they can also just survey 3, which means that, like, for example, if you're buying off of Amazon and you're required to survey 3 companies, okay, you look at 3 products and compare them and you make a decision. That's all there is sometimes in that solicitation process. We'll talk more about that just from some of those perspective of really knowing the rules of engagement, and then the people who you are engaging with, I think it's really important. But I love all the points that you just brought up. Michael, what are you seeing on this? Do you have some clients that are finding some success in GSA and some certain things that they're doing to be able to maybe stand out, or to kind of, like Rich mentioned, influence the acquisition?
I think getting in early and talking to customers is probably one of the most important things that most people ignore. I always tell people, just because you have a schedule doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to customers. In fact, just like Rich said, even in an RFP scenario or an RFI scenario where there's a place for them to put that in there, they don't necessarily read it. So that's a great just reminder right out of the gate there, that just because you wrote it down doesn't mean they read it, doesn't mean they understood it, doesn't mean they care. There's a lot of things, kind of going against you when you're that far in the acquisition process. So when I'm talking to clients, I'm always saying, look, you should only spend about 15 to 20% of your marketing BD time on things that are in acquisition mode. So it's actually an RFP, RFQ, or whatever. You should be spending the other 75, 80% or more of your BD efforts talking to people that don't have something on the street. So there isn't an RFP, there isn't an RFI, there isn't an anything where you've gone, you've done some homework, you've looked at the data that Rich is talking about and said, okay, these 25 contracting officers buy what I sell. They're at the agencies I want to target. I need capability briefs with these folks. I need conversations with them and their small business people. That's where you can have those conversations in position. Hey, Rich, you've got an opportunity to solve a problem here. It's a $200,000 opportunity. That's a great one to go through GSA. Have you thought of using GSA to solve that small problem before we go on to the bigger problem, and things like that, to get some traction and some past performance with an agency? And so those are really, really simple types of opportunities. An opportunity that big meets your goal for the year, even if it's 25K, meets your goal for the year. So now you've got your goal met and you can think more strategically about what you're doing. I also look at GSA as, when I'm doing the research, it's not always about, will I sell millions of dollars on the schedule, but will I be able to open some doors? Like Rich was saying, they were using the licensing as the entree, and then they were coming back with the services. So maybe they come in and they're only selling $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 a year through GSA technically, but where they're really making their money is on the back end servicing the stuff they sold on GSA. So when you think about GSA, don't just necessarily think about it as this is the end all be all. I'm going to funnel everything in my business through this. It's one tool in your tool bag. And so based on your customer set, you can decide how you use that tool and how often. You may use it at every customer. You may use it at 1 out of 5. It varies based on how people are buying what you sell and what else you sell. Again, in his case, they were selling a license, but they're also selling services. And they probably want to sell a lot of licenses, but they also want to sell a lot of services, and those services are probably more lucrative, higher profit margin. So they may only want to sell $200,000, $300,000 a year in licenses, but they may want to sell $5 million a year in services. That $5 million not going to show up on GSA. It's just probably not. That's not how it's going to be bought. But the GSA is a vehicle to get them in there to make it happen. And so if you think of it as a tool instead of just the end all be all, I think it makes using it a little bit easier, and it's easier to digest, the money you may have to spend, the time you have to spend to get it. But then you also may need others. So don't just think of it again as I just need GSA. You may need 3 vehicles. You may need 4 vehicles, whatever it may be, in order to fully service your client base that's out there. So those are my 2 cents.
All right. Rich, what do you think about Michael's 2 cents there?
He thinks I'm crazy.
That's very true. It's a way to open doors. And a lot of times, is it chicken or is it egg? Some people think, well, I need to get the GSA schedule so I can start selling to these people. It's strategically being there for your customer when it needs to be, as opposed to getting the GSA schedule and then go find the customers. That approach is okay. I'm not saying there's a problem with it, but I personally would say, don't wait till you get your fill in the blank GSA schedule, socioeconomic set aside, 8A business development certificate. Don't wait. Start. Because then as you get those things, those are just other tools you can put in your toolbox, and then you can get them out. Oh, yeah, well, we have a GSA schedule. It's just another way of looking at what it does. It's a tool. It's another way. It's another door opener, as Mike said.
Yeah. And we're always telling clients, look, if you know your GSA is coming, which over the last decade, I went from telling people it was going to take 6 months to get their GSA schedule to saying, I think Jesus may come back before you get it. We don't know. It's going to take so long, right? Because at one point it was taking almost 2 years for some people. All of a sudden, GSA about a year or so ago got the time down. It was taking 6 months again. I just talked to a client yesterday and she's like, Mike, it's been over a year. So you don't really know how long it's going to take to get your GSA schedule, which is another factor. It could be 6 months. It could be a year. I know there's that Springboard GSA, which is supposed to be a lot faster to get. But even then, you just don't know how long the process is going to take. Even submitting your GSA schedule. We've got a guy that does that on our team. I think he's one of the best in the business. He's super fast at it. He's been doing that for our clients for over a decade. He's really reasonable. And yet, a lot of times when people come to him, he's like, Mike, I can have this thing out the door in 30 days, but they won't get me this information. I'm asking for this. I'm asking for that. I can't get the information. So on just the submission piece, I've seen it take 6 or 8 months, a year for somebody to gather all their documents because they're running a business. So if you're going to go in and do GSA and get it submitted, you have to understand how long that wait time is and get all your ducks in a row, make it a priority, have the time to do it, because the faster you get it submitted, the faster it can start working in the government machine to come out, because we just don't know how long it's going to take. So take that into consideration. When it comes to doing your GSA schedule, you can do it by yourself. I know there's people in here that don't have one yet. Mark is one of those. He's got questions about it. So I'll just speak to this real quick. You can do it yourself. However, a lot of people pay an expert to do it because there's so much to do in the process. I've seen that range anywhere from about $6,500 to $40,000 and up for people to do. I think anything over about $8,000 or $9,000 to me, unless you've got millions of products and it's really complicated, is just way too much money. And so money, time, those are factors you need to think about in addition to, does my customer buy on this? How are they going to buy on it? But once you get all that going, you can start, as Rich said, starting to tell people, we've been submitted. This is coming. Don't know exactly when. You could start positioning when you're having those conversations with people, and you just keep talking to them about it until you have your schedule.
And what else I like about what you said, Rich, is just kind of get started in doing the reach out. I think a lot about the fact that, like any business that's doing business out there today, non-government world, right? It's like you've got a process usually, right? You got a sales process. You've got a defined product to offer. You work the process with your validated product that sells, and you make sales. But typically that process involves reaching out to people, getting in front of them, getting your products positioned in front of them. And I think that there's this notion that with government, it's a completely different animal. And the thing is to do is just basically register at SAM, maybe get a GSA if that's what your market research tells you. By the way, don't just buy somebody's services to put you on schedule because they called you up and told you you should do that. There's a lot of companies out there that are doing that. And I think that that's probably part of the reason why we have this problem with 52% of businesses getting kicked out of schedules, because they probably shouldn't have got it in the first place. So just be cautious about that. Do your homework on that. If you're working with an Apex accelerator out there, make sure you're talking to them to see, hey, can you help me understand if GSA is the right pathway to go for me? Work with a consultant to do some market research, whatever you have to do, but that price that you're going to pay up front is going to be a lot less than the cost you're going to pay down the road if you do all of that work and then you find that that's not the right place to be. So I can't really say enough about the market research, but kind of coming back to my point here is that I think the market seems that most contractors feel like everything's kind of done through the computer, where it's like, hey, I'm going to wait for the bid. I'm going to wait for the bid. And there's a problem with this. They don't work their process that probably was working for them in the commercial marketplace when they should be using that same process, the same methods of reaching out to their end customers, to the buyers, to have conversations, to engage with them. And that's going to really help them in a few ways. If they are on GSA schedules, they can actually maybe known and have a buyer specifically look to them and reach out to them. It really is telling. And what I see is one of the big problems for government contractors, both in open market and inside of GSA schedules, is that if you don't understand the way that the procurements happen, and that's why I mentioned earlier, go and read FAR Part 8. But just because you're on GSA schedule, you mentioned earlier, Rich, that like some people think that that's going to automatically get them contracts, well, which we know it's false. But not only does getting in a GSA schedule not only not going to get you contracts automatically, but it doesn't guarantee that you're even going to be getting a solicitation. Because if you go back and read FAR Part 8, there's a lot of buying activity that happens when either the contracting officer can simply say, hey, I'm going to look at 3 companies and I'm going to call it good and I'm going to pick one. So if you're 1 out of 100 on a schedule, how do you know that you're going to be one of the 3 that the contracting officer is going to reach out to? So that's why I believe that being able to talk to the contracting officer that does the buys for the types of stuff that you sell is great. Ask them, hey, how do you make a determination? Can you ensure that I get a quote? I'd love to be included on every quote that you send out, and vice versa. If you're doing your outreach efforts to your end customers, and that's not the buyers, contracting officers, that's the people inside of the agencies, your end users, your program managers, your department heads, whoever, if you're selling in the commercial marketplace, that your target avatar typically is to start to facilitate the conversation. That's another great person to reach out to, because they can do a few things for you. They can maybe request when they send the requisition forth to contracting to get purchased, to let the contracting officer know that they maybe received a preliminary quote from you and they would like to make sure that the contracting officer send you the RFQ. And there's a few other ways that can be beneficial, but that's where I tell people all the time to just work your process that works for you outside of the government marketplace. And there's primarily 3 differences in the government marketplace outside of the commercial world that you need to be aware of. One is the location of where you position your products. Specifically here within GSA schedules, I call that a location. It's a contract vehicle. So if you know that the volumes come in through there, you got to get in the GSA marketplace, that's what you do. The second piece is the compliance elements. So you'll need to understand the compliance elements unique to the government and make sure you're complying with those. And then the third thing is the paperwork. So just kind of getting that paperwork done. And for the GSA schedule, that's number 1, getting on the schedule. And then number 2, being able to receive, a quote and then complete the quote. And then from there, just do your best job in being the best value contractor and trying to understand how you measure up against the other contract holders that are on your schedule. You can go to the GSA library, you can go to the GSA Advantage website, you can look at other people's price lists, you start to look at all of these factors. And by the way, in FAR Part 8, which I mentioned that everybody read, there's also some other language that says additional items that the contracting officer shall consider when determining best values, things like warranty, those things. So make sure really you got the best value then when you are lucky enough to be solicited as one of maybe 3 vendors. And I used to be in contracting. I didn't buy off of GSA, but I had friends that did. And I knew friends that basically just did the minimum 3 quotes, and some that actually like to put the competition out to everybody. And then there's thresholds that says different things. So again, understand what those mean, connect in, and that's really my 2 cents there. So Rich, what are you seeing in all of this? What are we leaving out here?
Well, you brought up a good point. This is not really GSA, but this is a soapbox I get on. And I don't think I'm the only one that does. People that decide to skip the RFI, they decide not to submit the RFI. I'll wait till the bid comes out. And your point about GSA schedules is very well taken, especially in the context of GSA, because if I were to respond to respond to an RFI, say we have a GSA schedule, we know 2 others that also sell on GSA. We think that this is best as a GSA schedule bid. And then next thing you know, it isn't even coming out on eBay. It's emailed to me and maybe others, maybe not. Maybe they have the impression that other people are being emailed, but we're emailed, we submit, and we win. That's been a great tactic that we've used with that same client I talked about earlier with the software licenses. We reached out to every open market that bought it on open market and said, we think this is best suited for GSA. There's one other person that also did this on GSA. We're the lowest price. We don't think you can get this lower anywhere else. I think we've been successful in winning probably 5 bids on GSA since they've got it. Only 1 came out on eBay. And by the way, eBay, for people who don't know what eBay is the special portal that GSA only bids come out on. eBay is where GSA schedule holders go to bid on RFQs, RFPs.
And I don't want to be the dead horse here, but going back to telling folks to read FAR Part 8, look at the language there. Look at what's at the contracting officer's discretion to basically only use 3 quotes. And think about the fact that it doesn't state anywhere that they have to go out to all the vendors. Even when the competitions go above the simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000, basically it says to the extent practicable, and over that amount, they say, just make sure you're getting 3 quotes at least, So it's like, again, if there's 100 vendors on the schedule, what does it take to get 3 quotes? Maybe 5 RFQs to email to people, So again, I feel that like people miss a lot of opportunity just because they never see it happen and they're not in the conversation, so they're not in the game.
Yeah.
One thing I would add to this is it's really complicated being a business owner. Like it's really complicated. And when you throw in being a business owner, trying to learn the government market, then trying to learn nuances like GSA or other contract vehicles, or even how to speak to these people, even just the RFP process, it's so different than the way a lot of people sell commercially. Commercially, you're doing these quotes. It is the way it is. And you run through volume. Over here on the government side, there's so much strategy and so many different tools that I think people miss out when they just show up to a webinar like this or listen to a couple of podcasts, pick up a book on it. They miss out because when you look at your business, you really need a custom strategy for it. And so this is my pitch to everybody on here. If you are frustrated with what's going on with your GSA schedule, reach out to Rich and talk to him, because you've seen in just the 40 minutes we've been on here, like just the little nuances that most people are never going to think about. Those are the ones we've talked about in 40 minutes. There's probably 2 or 3 dozen others. So, it doesn't cost you anything to reach out to somebody like Rich and say, hey, given what we sell, who we're targeting, what are some custom strategies we should be thinking about? because you may not need a screwdriver or a hammer. You may need a wrench to do what you're doing. You may need a different tool in your tool bag to make your GSA schedule work, or you may need to know what to say in some of those. And so I can't stress enough how important it is to reach out, talk to an expert, even if you never engage them with a contract, to just talk to them and see for your business, for your challenges, what are some steps I should be taking to use this thing properly? Because we are talking at a high level, generalities, this is what you should do, but there's so many little pieces to finesse along the way that I think that's where people get lost and frustrated. Because again, if you're a business owner and you're one of the people on here today, you're thinking about payroll, you're thinking about contract, you're thinking about insurance, you're thinking about all these other things. And now you've got to throw this in there. It's like trying to learn a whole new thing. So don't beat yourself up. Bring in an expert to have a chat with. I mean, I talk with experts all the time that I don't necessarily engage. So it doesn't necessarily cost you anything. And if it makes sense, then you work with them. That's why we're all here to help you. But this is just one of those little intricate things about government contracting that really requires help. And I think a lot of people don't want to ask for help. So that's my soapbox for today on this one.
And I would say too, good help is hard to find as well.
That's true. That's true.
Especially
in this market, it's very difficult. So
it's definitely, I feel like the market for people that sell services out there to small businesses and others, it's really like a red ocean, really. It's like a shark infested red ocean.
You bring up a really good point real quick here. Yeah. Most people don't know why they get the call. They don't know why they get the call and they get spammed 100 times for GSA services and certification services and all that. A few months ago, Sam actually took that capability away from a lot of the marketers, but there's still databases running around. You used to be able to just download the spreadsheet with every single person in SAM, their phone number, email address, everything. It was all in the clear. And just in the last 6 months to a year, Sam pulled the email addresses out and some of the other contact information. So we're seeing less of that in the market. But before that, all you had to do was go on Sam. You didn't have to log in or anything. You download a spreadsheet. If you were good, you could connect your database to that one. And then you could actually just tie it in and it would automatically look and say, oh, here's Carroll. Here's Carroll's cage code, his DUNS number, his primary NAICS code, all that stuff. So we're going to send an email to Carroll that says, Carroll, you're missing out on billions of dollars in government contracts that are coming out on GSA and NAICS code, whatever, in this SIN. And, so it looked like they had pulled data, done research, and it looked really official when all it was a database connection that was filling in some predefined fields and spitting out emails all day long. And that's what was happening to a lot of people. They're still doing it based on the old data. So if you're still getting those emails, that could be why. But that's really why people were getting that information. They'd done no research on you. They were just broadcasting those emails and spamming people. So
Phishing. Government market phishing.
Yeah. I just tell people if anything that they get from those emails says .com, it's not legit.
That's a trick. Look at the email. Look at the email extension. Yeah. Or you need
.gov.
If it's not .gov or .mil, be careful because they're deceptive out there too. They'll make it look like they're from the government and they want to help. But
my favorite one is, Carroll, your SAM profile is not complete. The only reason they have your email is because you've completed your SAM profile.
That's right.
But if you pay us $1,099, we'll complete it and you'll start winning government contracts. No one's ever won a contract by having a complete SAM profile that I know of.
Right. I always tell people, I say, well, what do I need to win a government contract? Well, technically the minimum is a SAM profile, but I've yet to see somebody who set up a SAM profile and got a phone call wanting them to sign a contract.
Yeah, I've just never seen it. So
no, me neither.
Well, I think that we hit a lot of great points. And Rich, I'll give you the final words. If you have any last thoughts departing here, and we'll close down this session and then we'll shift over to the Q&A for those who are on the Zoom with us. And again, for those of you guys who joined us late, if you want to jump into the post-show Zoom Q&A, you can do that by going to govology.com/issues and just sign up for the Zoom call and jump in there with us.
Okay, thank you. So I'll say the same thing I say as to my coaching clients. It all starts with who buys what you sell. Whether we're putting together a strategy for them to win, or you're trying to figure out if a GSA schedule or another contract vehicle works for you, or even if government sales is even something you should look at, period. Who buys what you sell and how do they buy it? That's where it all starts. And there are tools out there that you can do some of this on your own. There's USA Spending. There's the SAM data bank. I think even fpds.gov is still working, I think, today. So until it's not. And then there's more DIY stuff that we have available on Federal Access, our portal that has strategy guides. And there's a strategy guide on how to do your own SAM data bank pull. You can work with people like me and Mike, and there's others out there, not just us, that you can work with, and they'll help you figure out who buys what you sell. So there's opportunities available. I just think you have to get deeper than these generic, this NAICS code had $2 billion last year. Well, that NAICS code holds a lot of stuff. We need to drill down better than that. We probably even need to use keywords when we're finding out who buys what you sell. So that's really my last word. It all starts with who buys what you sell. It tells you, do they use a GSA schedule? It tells you who's buying what you sell, how they're buying it. Sometimes it's important to find out when they're buying it. That's pretty much my last word.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I usually like to do a little recap and summary, but we shared so many great points today. And I really believe that if you're having an issue making sales on GSA schedules, your answers are somewhere in what we just talked about. So I would encourage you just to go back through. We're going to have this recording available at that same location where you guys who are on the Zoom call with us came to register, govology.com/issues. We'll get this uploaded there in about a week. Again, we're also on the popular podcasting channels. If you look for us, just GovCon Coffee and Issues. You might want to watch this again. Think about what we say here and take some action on those things. Maybe share that with some members of your team. If you got a BD or a salesperson and you guys are needing to get out there and make some sales happen. So thank you so much, Rich, for joining us. Again, Michael, thank you as always for being such a great co-host. And with that, we'll see you next month where I'll actually have a nice revamped office. I can't let Michael show me up anymore, but I did break out my little eagle here so I could have something. Next month, we're going to have a new office set up. So I'm excited all about that. But until then, we'll see you. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to pop up the chat, but we're going to read a few questions. And actually, Michael, can you help me out with the chat Q&A? Pop that up and see if we got any good questions there. But another way you could ask questions, if you just want to raise your hand and come on and ask us live, we can have a little chat like that. We can unmute your mic and go from there. So, by the way, one more thing. If there's something that we didn't mention and you guys have some strategies, please share them with the group as well. I know there's a lot of smart people on the call here today. So what you got, Michael?
I think one of the first question was from Mark. I think we answered that pretty thoroughly about maybe you don't need a GSA schedule. Sharon asked, how do you access eBuy?
So the best way to access eBuy is, well, number one, you have to have a GSA schedule to be able to access the eBuy. You can't look at eBuy bids unless you have a GSA schedule. So that's first. Second, you go to ebuy.gsa.gov if you do have a GSA schedule and you use your login, same one you used for submitting your GSA schedule through eOffer. That's usually how you would get on to eBuy. But also with eBuy, you are only going to see the bids for the SINs that you have a contract for. So if you have a contract to provide general management consulting services, which is 541611, you will only see 541611 bids. You will not see 54151S, which is custom software development. You will not see those bids. So it's not the same as SAM where you can see anything you want to see. You're only going to see the ones that you're subscribed to.
Then Gail asked about, is it correct to think of 4 general paths to initial success in getting a GSA schedule off the ground? Path 1, your market research. Path 2, SAM.gov, current solicitations. Path 3, outreach. And Path 4, respond RFIs and sources sought. I think that you covered quite a bit of it there, Gail, in there, just kind of listening to us there. And, the thing about each one of those paths that you described is based on, say, Path 1 with your market research, that will guide you down some different areas as well. So when I'm doing research, I kind of like to look at a little bit of everything. And as I pull it up, I'll be like, oh, well, there's this nugget in this section, and it's going to lead me to go look somewhere else, or go look at something else, or maybe go look at somebody else's schedule and see how they're doing with sales. That's something we didn't really talk a lot about, is you can pull up somebody else's schedule in the e-library and you can see, well, how much did Rich sell on GSA on his schedule, if Rich has a schedule? So you may have some competitors that are like, man, GSA is just amazing. You pull it up and you're like, well, your version of amazing and mine are two very different things, because, $1 million over the last 10 years is not a lot of money. But looking at your competitors is often a really great way, just pulling up their schedules and seeing, are they actually selling on this? Or is it big fat goose eggs? And then while you're in that database, while you're in SAM looking at stuff, you can go and pull up your competitors and look at just where are they actually making their money, because they may say GSA, but that may be 5% of their sales. The other 95 may be on NASA Soup or Oasis, or a combination of those things, or maybe half of it's open market. So you can very quickly sort out the noise by looking in the market research phase in SAM.gov and USA Spending. I kind of bounce between the two, going back and forth, pulling my reports to figure out if it makes sense and then who you should target. So good questions there from Gail. Rich or Carroll, did you have anything to add to that?
I think that one tool that I'd also like to make mention of, in addition, we talked about USA Spending and the SAM Data Bank as good resources, which they are. But the GSA also has a sales query tool, and they've got some reports. I just posted the link here for those of you guys who want to click on that link and check out that website, maybe bookmark it. If I were actually selling on GSA schedules, I would definitely be learning these research tools to see, for the schedule that I'm in, where are the sales going there, and what does that look like, and who's getting the sales. And because if you're sitting out there and basically you go through a year seeing like nothing come your way in terms of RFQs, just remember, again, that the agency is not required to solicit to everybody on that list, even if you got the contract. So maybe you're missing the sales, and this is one way where you can actually see the activity that you're not being included in, and maybe figure out a way to get yourself included in that. One other thing that I actually popped into my mind that I wanted to mention, there's a clause in FAR Part 8, which I mentioned a couple of times during the show, and it's only, I think, oversimplified acquisition thresholds on opportunities that require a statement of work. If that's the case, there's a clause that says the contracting officer shall provide a copy of the RFQ to any contractee or contractor that requests it. So it's not found in the other parts. So is it relevant? What I would do is I would also make it a best practice that if I knew that there was something coming out, if I got word, if I had communications in with folks, or I knew other vendors are on the schedule and they receive something, I would definitely request that the contracting officer forward an RFQ to me. I might even try to do a blanket request to say, hey, this is who we are. This is our schedule. I would like to just formally request that we get a copy of all RFQs related to these products. It's worth a shot. Everything may help, might not work, but I would just, again, use those tools to your advantage, and then just think about the rules of engagement and how you can get yourself to be included in those acquisition competitions.
There's another question here from Juan. It's, can you elaborate more on Oasis and the agency behind it? I don't know if anybody wants to talk Oasis. We're actually getting into Oasis Plus now, which I think that RFP is on the street right now, due in September, maybe.
Oasis, it's also managed by GSA. It's used for professional services. It's a different contract. There are other nuances to it. I don't know exactly what all those are because I haven't read especially the new Oasis Plus RFP. But I also know too that this is different than a GSA schedule. With GSA schedule, you can basically go out anytime and start the process of getting on as a multiple on the multiple award schedule. Oasis, they have an on-ramping period, and they'll have a period of about 5 years, and then that will go away, and then you'll get another chance to on-ramp again. But you just can't go submit a proposal for Oasis in the middle of an Oasis contract period. That's a big difference between that and GSA. There's other probably differences, but I can't speak to those. Mm-hmm. But I do know, I mean, again, this is contract vehicle agnostic. I mean, whether you're looking to who buys what you sell on GSA or Oasis, all you're looking for is a different first 6 digits of that reference IDV code. Mm-hmm. So that's what tells the difference. Yeah. And it all ties back to an agency.
Yeah, the only point I'll make about Oasis here is whether it's Oasis or anything else, don't go out and collect these vehicles like baseball cards.
Right.
That's the mistake that most people make. I will pull up a website. They've got 18 contract vehicles and $500,000 in revenue over the last 5 years. And I'm like, so you're collecting contract vehicles, but you're not doing anything with them. So you've got to be able to convert contract vehicles into contracts. And you have to understand that goes back to the market research. Am I getting on the right contract vehicles for my audience that I want to focus on? And am I doing the work after that, whether it's responding to task orders or whatever it may be? Am I marketing it properly? And if you're not going to win. So just having a collection of these doesn't guarantee you anything. They're just vehicles the government can use to purchase from you if everything else lines up with your strategy there. So with that, Carroll, I've got to hop off, get on another call. Rich, you're in great hands with Carroll, or Carroll.
Right. Well, actually, I got a 2 o'clock also.
So, okay. Then
what I'd like to do in the chat before I leave, I'd like to put out my, I'm just going to put out my calendar. If anybody wants to schedule a strategy session with me, feel free to get on my calendar and we can discuss your specific scenario, and if it makes sense, maybe we can work together.
Perfect.
All righty. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Rich. Thanks, Michael.
See everybody next month.
Thanks, Elena.
Next month, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.